Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome from a magnificent Cape Town. As I look out the window, there's not a cloud in the sky, and it's wonderful to have so many people over here. Over 200 people have logged on to hear our guest speaker. It's Series 7, Episode 15. This is the last presentation in the first half of this year, ladies and gentlemen, because school holidays and varsity holidays start either this or next week. And it gives me great pleasure to have our new speaker over here. We've never yet had Professor Tinus Kruger before on this webinar. And my co-host, Professor Stephen Jeffrey, is going to be introducing him. My name is Peter de Jong, and it's wonderful to have such a wonderful topic here. We've never had male infertility, and we've had many people ask, when are we going to have something about male infertility? So tonight, we've heard you, we've addressed your questions, and we're going to be having male infertility, principle used in day-to-day practice. We have Professor Steve Jeffrey over here, and he's just flown in from Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan, as you know, is next to Iran, and it's wonderful that he could free himself from the trouble in the Middle East, land at lunchtime, and here he is. Hey, presto, he's going to be co-hosting tonight's presentation.
No
Steve.
No, it's indeed a privilege to have Professor Kruger. Professor Kruger was my lecturer when I was at the University of Stellenbosch, and I've known him very well personally, and without doubt, a world expert on male fertility. Many of you will have heard of the Kruger criteria, and that is indeed the very Professor Kruger we have with us on the webinar tonight. And Professor Kruger also was the pioneer of fertility treatments in South Africa, with the first IVF treatment in South Africa having been done in his clinic and in his hands. So a real icon of fertility that we have with us tonight. And so Professor Kruger, thanks so much for joining us. Your slides are already on and far away. We are very keen to hear your background and your approach to this problem that we don't talk enough about.
Yeah, Steve, Professor Kruger was in America, in the United States, for many years at that clinic over there. The two very famous icons of fertility there. And did he begin the Avitas Fertility Clinic at the Vincent Pallotti Hospital, Steve?
Yeah, Professor Kruger and with Ichno and that bunch of doctors.
Bunch of scallywags.
Yeah, absolutely.
So without further ado, without further waste of time, Professor T.F. Kruger, Avitas Fertility Clinic. Steve?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter and Jeffrey. Thank you for the invitation. I feel honored. I told Peter that the two of us are in Afrikaans vastbyters. That's a new word, and that means you're hanging in there. So I still enjoy working, not too much, but enough, and I enjoy preparing for lectures, and I'm busy at the moment with Malaika Patel with the exams of the college, so it keeps me busy and hopefully sharp. Peter, can one do urogynecology in one lecture? No, I know you can't. And male infertility is the same. So I'm inviting myself for a follow-up because I could only cover a few aspects, but I try to make it very practical.
Well, we're going to hold that. We're going to hold you to that, Professor Kruger, because there's been so much clamoring. We always talk about, obviously, female infertility or female fertility, and we've never yet touched on this. So I'm hoping that you remember what you've just told us now, that you are going to come back and finish the aspects that need polishing on male infertility in future.
Yeah, let's just make sure that the guys are not sleeping. If they're not asleep after 30 minutes, then you can invite me definitely back. I will come. Thank you. So I'm going to just talk about principles of treatment, and you've just touched on that. That is always female, but you can't separate the female from the male. We're going to talk about lifestyle and the rest you see there. And if there are other loose ends, we'll try to cover that. So it's only one slide here, but one must see the male and female together. You can't talk about female infertility and not see the male or vice versa. So, as it is true of most areas in our field, a good history that anyone can take can help you to unravel this puzzle of male and female infertility. And one must give attention to the female because she often compensates for male factor fertility. For example, if you are dealing with a low sperm morphology or low count, and you don't focus on the female, you will miss an ovulation or poor ovulation, correct that, and she's pregnant in spite of the so-called lower semen parameters. And then just a point that I feel very passionate about is that patients on this journey often needs support, psychological support. If the practitioner can't give it, get to a place where people are passionate about taking the patient's hands, and sometimes we need a psychologist on board as well as a psychiatrist in certain cases. So, Peter, I'm going to stop there for a second because you've said you want interaction as we go along. So on those few points, they're richer than they think that they look. Perhaps there are questions.
Okay, yeah, here's the first question. We've had a few questions come through. Do you, Professor Kruger, examine the male personally and clinically, or do you send him to a urologist for analysis? What is your practice?
I've personally been involved in male fertility a long time, so I examine him. But I also work closely with urologists, and I just think that if you at least be able to judge the size of the testes, exclude the varicocele, basic things, it is helpful. And also, sometimes the male says, this is the first time that anyone examined me ever. So I think if possible, if there's a little training in the background, it can also help the urologist, and you can direct your patient quickly to a urologist, where if you miss a varicocele or ignore it, it can take a long time before they correct something like a varicocele, which can improve semen parameters if done correctly.
So if they have any varicocele, you're going to have to, well, varicocele is sort of like a varicose vein of the testicle. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a macro. If you feel it, you correct it. If it's ultrasound detected, the literature says it makes no difference. So
Okay.
it is a physical temperature change in the testis due to the large varicocele.
Okay, thank you.
So for those of us who aren't familiar with examining males, it's quite easy to feel if you just
Palpate the
palpate it.
testicle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting. Okay.
Did you ask a question? I'm sorry, I have a bad sound here.
Oh yeah, no. I was just saying that, some of us who've basically been in gynae our whole lives haven't really ever examined a testicle. So, it's and if you did examine the partner, it is something that you'd be quite easy to feel. Tinus, it's not a difficult thing to feel the varicocele.
Would it hit you in the eye if there was a big varicocele? I mean, do you always see them? Do you spot them? Do they look like for example, a varicose vein in the testicle, or is this something you just feel?
Yeah, sometimes if I hear you correctly, Peter, just position that microphone. There's something, it's either on my side or I hear you better than I hear Stephen. So I don't
Okay.
know. Let's just test. Do a test. Go closer and let me listen.
Okay. So we've just turned up our microphone. So if a man has a varicocele, would you spot it or would you feel it in the first instance? Because we're not used to feeling men's testicles. Unfortunately, we've had most of us, 99% of us have had no experience whatsoever in male fertility assessment.
Yeah, I hear you better. I think this closer to the mic. Yes, I think perhaps the answer to that question is the average gynecologist, not accustomed to examining males, if they see a low semen parameters, we're going to talk about that, refer him for a good physical exam with your friendly urologist around the corner.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right, so we go on.
Yeah.
So I just want to reflect on lifestyle, because I see and have seen that we sometimes ignore, we run over lifestyle, and all lifestyle activities are impacting. Also, detailed question. Example, I had a farmer the other day, and he's exposed to pesticides. And I looked up the pesticides. They all affect the semen parameters. No one ever gave attention. So find out where the guy is working, what he's doing, and of course the obvious: smoking, marijuana, alcohol, etc. And weight. Um, in my setup, I will often not treat the husband or female, because you waste their money if they don't correct their weight. So here's a list of things. So the common, of course, BMI, give attention. If you can't give advice on weight loss, usually that is the most common, sometimes weight gain. Then get a dietitian. Smoking, obvious, but people don't ask and they're not clear. And I usually write on a piece of paper, STOP, stop. I also tell the females that if they smoke and they 30, they're actually 40 years old. And the quality of the gametes will be affected by the smoking. And caffeine is also a factor, as well as alcohol. Here's a few slides to just illustrate it. So BMI high leptin levels in the serum of the follicular fluid, and that apparently affects the quality of egg, and also higher chance of miscarriages in overweight women. But also men that's overweight will have lower sexual drive and low sperm counts. And I'm just asking the question if we give enough attention to diet. Also, patient coming back to you after they've been had success with first baby. They weighed 62 at the time of the conception, and 2 years later they weigh 82. Don't start with fertility treatment, start with weight loss. Smokers, you all know this, I'm just giving a few slides here. Time to pregnancy is longer in smokers, and passive smoking, active smoking, all affects the outcome. The yellow decreased pregnancy rates, and meta-analysis are showing a clear lower birth rate. Paternal smoking, passive smoking, so the male is smoking, female not. Ask where he's smoking. Is he smoking in the car? Is she affected by the smoking? And then all semen parameters will be decreased in smoking men. On the other hand, also this point, I'll underline it later again, that if the semen parameters are normal, but he's smoking, he will have DNA fragmentation. And I always show them a sperm head with a yellow dot, that is normal DNA, or black dot, and that is any form of smoking will make that DNA abnormal and affect outcome. And then caffeine, women drinking a lot of coffee affects outcome, especially more than 6 cups. We say you can, and we say it because the literature is supporting us, 2 cups a day is fine, but even in women with taking more than 6 cups a day can also cause an intrauterine death. And that's just in brackets, and 20 male consuming a lot of alcohol. I always say to the men, if you drink more than 4 drinks every weekend. That's binge drinking. That's the definition. You're affecting your outcome and your sperm quality. So I will stop here and we can perhaps talk about lifestyle.
Here we go. Can you hear me, Tinus?
I hear you. I hear you.
Now, today I had a guy, and I was examining his wife, and she wants a baby, and you'd send her into the room and close the door, and he's there chatting to you, and he smokes and drinks, but he says he went to Clicks and he bought these vitamins. I said that looks like rubbish advice to me. Is it true? Can they compensate for smoking and drinking by using Clicks vitamins for men for fertility use, or is it rubbish stuff?
Yeah, it's rubbish.
Yeah.
I'm glad you are talking about this, and also I didn't include that in the lecture, but while we are talking about lifestyle, there's nothing like stopping smoking. There's nothing that will compensate. But polypharmacy, women, especially women, taking 110 vitamins, supplements, and shakes, definitely some of them toxic. So you must see what they are taking. Thank you for that question. Look at each drug she's taking, and I research it. I make sure. And like the black cohosh that you hear they taking, evening primrose oil, all those things are toxic to gametes and not indicated. So I think just a summary, make sure that they're only on pregnancy supplements cleared for pregnancy or folic acid. That's enough. Nothing else.
Thank you.
Shall we go to the next one?
Yeah.
This vaping, before I go, vaping is bad. Marijuana, ask them about drugs. And just on a lighter note, also ask them about sex. Do they have sex? This is not on the map, but while we were asking questions, I always ask. And my friend Kobie van der Merwe once said that a patient told him, "Doctor, you're the first one that ask us about that. We don't have sex." But they coming, they don't present that as the main complaint. They can't fall pregnant. And then you discover certain things. So I think very important to take the thorough history. Perhaps that is just also lubricants. I'm not talking about lubricants tonight, but ask them, any lubricant on the market affects the quality of sperm movement and sometimes immobilize. So anything on the market is a no-no, whatever they say. And I always say to the men, don't start your sexual activity 11 o'clock in the evening. Take time, and the female in 99% of cases will lubricate.
Professor Kruger has another question here, Tinus. How much sex is enough sex? Is 3 times a week, or I know 3 times a month, you're wasting your time. Is 3 times a week better?
Yeah, the question, thank you for that. Very important. Is too much also bad? So let's say you discover that she's ovulating on day 12. I'm answering the question another way. She's ovulating on day 12. You are sure she makes a peak on day 11, she ovulates on day 12. So her fertile window is somewhere between 11 and 14. Every second day in that window is sufficient to make her pregnant. And then, so sometimes when they've been trying a long time, they are put out, tired when they come to the fertile window. And one must put their minds at ease that every second day is sufficient. If they do have sex in the fertile window every day, it is fine. The semen quality will improve. So, Peter, usually women then, or couples with 3 times a week sex will have no problem in covering the fertile window. But they
Okay,
must be
thank you.
aware of that. And that is why one must test them thoroughly, know where's the fertile window, and then guide them. That's why I said in the beginning, you must see the male and female together and have this type of discussion with them, which will help them to understand better. There's this game called telephony. So it doesn't help the woman goes back home and try to convince the male of certain things or tell he must hear himself. That's the ideal.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just if you can hear me, Tinus, otherwise Pete can ask a question from Francis Kitsoff. Maybe you should ask Pete.
Francis Kitsoff. Okay, I'll read it out to you since the microscope works better my side. Francis Kitsoff says, I'm the product of your earlier career in 1990. It seems the literature is conflicting with regards to male supplements like zinc. I know you mentioned earlier the word rubbish. Does that apply to all supplements for males, or is it a generic rubbish?
Okay. Thank you. Male supplements, if you want to do something, you must increase the antioxidant. And you can do that by giving vitamin C. 300 milligrams a day is good. There's studies showing the value of zinc, and the dose is 40 milligrams a day. And then the females thought that folic acid is their vitamin. But no, we've taken it back. It's also the male vitamin. So that apparently with zinc, with vitamin C, which you can just prescribe separately, will be the correct supplements based on previous research.
Okay, thank you.
If you take something with respect like Stamina Grow, very good vitamin, and people prescribe it for fertility, but the vitamins are low. So it's a general vitamin there. And I also see that in the north, people give that to as a pre-pregnancy vitamin to the patient, a female patient. There's no proof that Stamina Grow is fine there. So keep it simple. And simple means folic acid and a good diet is enough.
Okay.
On the female side.
Thank you.
That's zebra. You know the story, Peter, of the zebra and the young zebra just born, the calf, and that imprint that it makes in its brain when it sees its mom. And that's how they find each other. Now, when Investec thought that they have invented the zebra as a logo, but I've been using this zebra as a logo due to the story of imprinting and pattern recognition my whole career. So I will one day ask my bank, when did they start with the zebra? But I've started it in lectures a long time ago. The reason is that I want to show you the patterns of sperm morphology later. So we're going to talk about the basic semen analysis, and we do a semen analysis to get a good report to make decisions. That's obvious. It's still the cornerstone of male fertility assessment. It evaluates the sperm production and function, but it must be interpreted with what I've said in the beginning. Take a good history, get the sexual history, get the lifestyle. You can't just look at the report and say, oh, you are fertile, but he's smoking 20 a day. He's affecting his fertility due to lifestyle. So I'm going to talk now about the World Health Organization weight that they got to the lower thresholds, and also show you our own data, more clinical, more practical, that brought us to certain decisions in clinical practice. So they used fertile population. I sat on that committee in the previous WHO decisions on semen parameters, and they looked at the fifth centile of a fertile population, and then they worked out the lower thresholds. That's how they got to the lower threshold, but it linked into research in other parts of the world and also into our own research of lower thresholds. So that's why I think it's still acceptable, but it's another way to try to understand what is lower fertility. I start with volume. So we're doing now threshold values. I only have 3 slides here. So if the value of the threshold is above 1.4, it's normal. But if you have a male with a 0.5, 0.2 milliliter of semen, it's a red flag, and it can be considered as retrograde ejaculation. You must go and look in the bladder, ask him to urinate after first ejaculation to find out if there's not sperm going back into the bladder, retrograde. The new threshold value is that if you are above 16 million sperm, you're theoretically fertile, but everybody now knows that we want to know I'm not smoking, I'm not drinking, etc. So if you are below this threshold, they say it's oligo. I personally think below 10 million and definitely below 5 million per milliliter repetitively is a much better yardstick. But at least we can say if you go below, let's say 14 million per milliliter, it's an orange flag. It's not a red flag. If you are in the region of 3 million per milliliter, a serious problem. But always, principle, repeat the semen analysis after 2 months of correction. Often you must correct the lifestyle measures. That's the most common thing that I do every day, correct lifestyle. So here is the slide summarizing volume. You see it there. Then concentration, I've just talked about it. Count, total count, that is now, let's say you've got 3 million sperm per milliliter times volume 2 mole, that will give you 6 million total count. So that's a total count. So if you above 39 million, it's normal. Below that, it's an orange flag. That's all that it is, not a red flag yet. Motility threshold can be seen there, 42%. That's to me very vague. So we work with 40%, and it's not a black and white thing, but you can clearly see 5% motility, and you can see 90% motility. So it is a very relative threshold, but helpful. And then the last 3 blocks, progressive motility, 30%, vitality, how many is alive, 54%. If you're above that, it's good. And then morphology. And I'm going to talk more about morphology. So it's interesting that the curve on the fertile population also showed that there's a percentage of men with lower morphology, but still fathered the children. But I want to show you how we got to the warning. That's a red flag if you're truly below 4%. That is the P pattern. So we described this a long time ago, and I'm just running through the research that they've done. Mengveld sadly passed away recently, described the normal form. And this is now back to the zebra. This is pattern recognition. You'll understand when I show you slides. So, but you must teach the scientists, and some of them are like the little zebra that did not see the mum. So there's no imprint. So the scientists are giving us wrong reports because they're not well trained. So bear that in mind. When you read a semen analysis and you see low morphology, make sure that it is a place that does morphology often and really understand the patterns. There are certain labs in our city, general labs, that do not report the morphology reliable. Almost everything that I get from certain labs are P patterns, and it's not truly below 4%. So they make mistakes. So we must just bear that in mind. So what is the pattern? There are 3 patterns. 0 to 4 is the P, poor prognosis. G pattern, 5 to 14, that's where most men are. And then above 14, those are our springboks. So that you can see elongated, thin, ugly little sperm. That is a typical abnormal form. On contrast with this one, look at those oval-shaped sperm and nice acrosome on top. The dark blue is the post-acrosomal area. There are certain rules that we apply here, but you can see, if I tell you once, you've got that pattern in your head, and you will distinguish the true. This is a true P pattern, true low morphology. Sometimes you get difficult slides to judge, but I hope this helps you. And now we take true sperm here. Can you see my cursor?
Yep, we can.
Okay, that sperm is abnormal. I just want to see. Yeah, that's abnormal. Broken neck. There on top, you can see the neck. That one is abnormal with a vacuole in the acrosomal area. We actually take 3 vacuoles or more than 2 as totally abnormal. That one is amorphous. There's no acrosome. There's only dark. And those sperm are usually chromosomally abnormal. But you can now, Peter, show me that one. It's the oval shape. It's a beautiful nice sperm. And also that one. And that one. And then that one is oval, but the acrosome is affected. The acrosome is smaller. It must be 40% or more. And compare it with that one. Here you can see smaller acrosome, larger post-acrosomal area, and there are reasons why that's called abnormal. I'm not going to go detail there, but I think it's nice for the clinician now to say, oh, I understand in a way the patterns, pattern recognition. And the scientists that must be trained, if they're not well trained in this type of slide, they will call, for example, that one normal and there's no acrosome. All right. So we want a reliable report. But now I want to show you data on the morphology in clinical practice. So in 1986, I published the pattern story 1988, where we clearly showed a significant lower IVF outcome in the P pattern versus the other 2 patterns. But it took the world a long time, 16 years, before we could have enough data from other researchers repeating the work. And then we did the structured review by Coetzee, my PhD friend, and we saw the following. We could analyze 49 articles. WH criteria 17, it was the old criteria, very liberal. Everything was normal. And the strict criteria were 22 articles. And then statistically analyzed, we had 15 that we could analyze. And here you can see the meta-analysis with a significant impact on fertilization, that pink little bar. And you can see the studies were quite big. It was reliable. Here we see pregnancy data, and again, the threshold showed a significant better pregnancy rate above the 5%. So that is in the G patterns versus significantly lower in the P, poor prognosis pattern. Here is the rates in those years. 7% pregnancy rate in the P pattern versus 21% in the other patterns. So anyone can see the numbers are good, and that's how we got more certainty that what we've observed at Tygerberg Hospital and what I observed in the USA in Norfolk was true. And that is much better evidence from my perspective, if you talk now in vitro, than the normal population bell curve with the 5% that I've showed you. So this is just on IVF. We've also, that was the patients with no transfer, a third, 25, a quarter of patients with P pattern, that is below 5%, didn't even have a transfer, zero fertilization. So we could say that strict criteria predict in vitro at least fertilization and pregnancy outcome. And we then called the P pattern poor prognosis pattern for very good reason. And we couldn't analyze the studies from using the other criteria. So it showed us that it was not very specific, non-specific. They didn't see the patterns. So IUI, Johannes van Baart, that you all know, did his thesis with me on IUI and the impact of morphology. Many articles reviewed, many variables, because IUI is not so pure a model as IVF. And he wanted to see if morphology is an indicator of my fertility, and reviewed a lot of articles, 421, but we only got 6 on strict criteria and 2 on WHO. And we did a meta-analysis and saw that P patterns do give pregnancies, we know it. But it was 7% versus 14% in the other patterns. So the lower morphology groups also showed pregnancy. But here you can see with that dot there, the green, that it was significantly different between the two groups, the P pattern and the G pattern. I just wanted to show, let's just stop there. I think this was helpful.
Dennis, talking about criteria, we've had a question here. Mohammed Jiva has been on my case for months to get you to talk here. And as I said, you didn't mention viscosity. Is that still something we worry about, or no longer?
Yes. Of course, viscosity important. And sometimes it's rare, not rare. You see it, I can't give a figure, but you find that it takes longer if it's a very viscous sample, longer to liquefy, and sometimes difficult to separate sperm, but you can do it. But it can be a factor and sometimes necessary to do IUI in those cases.
So is there anything, if a male has a particularly viscous semen, does it mean that he's got an infection, or he's got lots of white cells, or he's got an STD?
Yeah, thank you for that. As part of the semen analysis, we always do a culture on the semen. So you must exclude any obvious infection. That's routine in a good lab, first visit. Second, I think that if there's lots of white cells, often we know there's this toxic substance called oxidant species is higher when there's a lot of white cells. If we see white cells, WHO says you must treat it, even if it's empirical. But there are certain men, a small percentage, that always have white cells unexplained. But they have a problem with oxygen species and they're more DNA fragmentation. That's where a DNA fragmentation test can be valuable to judge his DNA fragmentation. It's called the tunnel assay.
Thank you.
Shall we go on?
Yeah, let's carry on.
All right, so perhaps to save time, I'll come back to this. This is just 117 patients on endometriosis, and Dani Botha published this in Fertility and Sterility, and he noticed that a third of patients have some other male factor. So endometriosis patient, how can you see her if fertility is a problem in isolation? In a third of cases, or it's actually the severe cases was 12%. Let's say 15% of endometriosis cases got a severe male factor. So you must see male and female together as a unit and handle both. I think the pills just summarize the unit. I've said that. And no single semen parameter predicts fertility, but if you read morphology correctly, it is a very helpful parameter based on what I've showed you. Always interpret the result in context, and I mean by that, take that full history, get the whole picture. Don't just look at the semen analysis alone. I haven't even seen the male. And if there's an abnormal test, we repeat it in, let's say, 3 months, because it takes us 90 days to make new sperm and to correct lifestyle. No point in doing analysis after 3 months if there was no correction of lifestyle. Now I want to talk about vasectomy reversal. Peter, you will know, we were taught that 10 years, if it's longer than 10 years, don't reverse.
Yeah.
But there's this guy in the United States a number of years ago that did studies, and so 15 years or more. Look at the pregnancy rate there. 15 to 19 years, 49% pregnancy rate, not looking at the female. 20 to 25% and more than 25%. So I think, next slide will give you the answer, that if you're dealing with a young woman that is marrying a guy like you and me, Peter, then you can reverse.
Speak for yourself.
The poor guy's got the energy, and pregnancy rate spontaneously will be high in that 30-year-old woman. 30 to 35, these are higher than the average try per IVF. So it gives you an indication that you can reverse, but in the women older than 37, it's starting to drop, and time, you must use your clinical knowledge to decide, must I reverse and then wait 2 years, then she's 39 and not pregnant as yet. So it's a discussion that you must have with the patient. But I found this, the previous dogma, I think was not solid enough. I think this gives us a new indicator.
Information.
Questions?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me this now. So I'm just noticing that a lot of the parameters that are used in semen analysis are quite subjective. With the newer technologies, are we looking at maybe more objective ways of determining these things?
For example, does AI play a role in pattern recognition that wasn't the case in the past?
Your question is, does AI
Assist with the pattern recognition the new technologies of social.
Good question. I'll answer it. Just a second. I see now I will be more visible.
Oh, yeah.
I was not on the golf course trying to play and give a lecture. I'm here. So yeah. So AI. I'm busy
And pattern
playing.
recognition.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. I tell you. Let me tell you a story. In 1986, I was in the States for my fellowship. And I played a lot of squash in those years. And I sat one afternoon with my friend Ed Stein, who's a lawyer, and said, I was busy with the morphology thing. And I said, I wonder if you can teach a computer to read, because the oval shape is very specific, and we measured 1,000 sperms. We know exactly the micrometers, etc., etc. And then I came back to South Africa, and I made contact with a guy called Conrad de Tooy. And actually first Jaco van der Merwe, and Jaco was an image analysis expert in those years, both electronic engineers. And I thought that it's almost AI, but it was very early days of AI. Can't you teach the computer to recognize? And he said, after 3 months, no, I must talk to Conrad. It's image analysis. It's like the small orange, big orange separation thing. You must teach the computer via image analysis, which we've done. I worked with Conrad, and we did a PhD on it, and we saw that the computer can be as good as a senior technologist reading. And that technology is been in a computer system called IBOS later on, to read sperm morphology in lazy American labs where they don't want to learn, they want the machine to do everything. But it was yeah. So now to come back to your question of AI, I think AI, and I'm busy now playing with that, can be an interesting tool to see if you can teach the computer via AI. Yeah.
Thank you.
Interesting. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Can I go on?
Yep, let's carry on. Yeah.
Well, so actually I'm at my last slide. So the male and female, I'm doing it over and over because I feel passionate about it. And as you've said, you've been talking about female fertility, but every time you should have asked me to just say a word when you talk about your interesting topics. Lifestyle, we've made the points. Basic analysis, I think that sentence is clear. Vasectomy reversal, Belcher showed us that you can do it later in life. And that's basically my messages for today. And I'm open for another few questions.
Thank you. We've got one or two. The first question is this: the age of males. At what age is a man at his most fertile?
Yeah, I think one can ask the question in a different way and say, do you get decrease in fertility at a certain age? And we know that there's more impact on Down syndrome, etc., from the male side in older men, like 50 and older. So when I look at, if the lifestyle of the male is good, then his semen quality will stay relatively good. But I think there are these other factors that can impact on on the baby's outcome, like the DNA changes, like in the egg, also in the sperm.
Okay.
We are luckier than women, where the age clearly affect them drastically.
Thank you. Another question here is we know that testosterone use, particularly in bodybuilders, is really bad for semen. What about people that do lots of bodybuilding without the use of supplements? Are they also subject to poor semen parameters?
Yeah. You see, that is why I wish I can talk to you again, because this is a absolutely important question, but it comes to history. If you take a thorough history, you will identify that male on some other supplement. Then you look and you see, whoa, he's on androgens, or they get these androgens at the gym. So ordinary supplements like whey protein and so on will not affect fertility, but it is the misuse of androgens. Massive impact, sometimes irreversible. I have a guy, a cage fighter. For some other reason, I understand why he's been on supplements, on testosterone for a long time. We can't get his sperm back.
Interesting.
So firstly, I'd just like to, as an aside, say that one of us tonight on the webinar is a cage fighter. I won't tell you who it is, but I want you to please be aware that cage fighting is not healthy. Steve, did you have a question? It's not Steve. He's not a cage fighter.
Yeah.
So the other thing is this, another question: which medical conditions affect men most of all in poor semen quality? For example, I think that they're referring to hypothyroidism. Is that an issue? And then second is diabetes.
Yeah, diabetes. I'm just shooting from the hip. Let's start with the brain tumor. Or men born with hypo. So they've got low LH, low FSH. They don't get into puberty. I've just had someone like that. It took us 9 months of injections with FSH and LH, and he came through puberty and sperm, and we froze it. But he will never recover. He will long-term need testosterone. And then diabetes, of course, is a ugly disease and affecting the male heavily. Crohn's disease, but more the drugs that they must use have an effect on sperm. So hypothyroidism, definitely you must correct that. High prolactin, or a tumor again in the brain, microadenoma with high prolactin will suppress the semen. And if you treat the male with bromoagropeptine or dopamine, it will solve the problem. So I have a lecture on azoospermia, and azoospermia and severe oligospermia will connect to your question, and how to handle the different groups, and also this whole new arena of microTese, with Dr. Jelle here in our city, and Hugo Ackerman, who's been trained in the USA to do microTese, and in selected cases we get fantastic results in men with severe problems.
Another question over here, Tins. It's lots of men nowadays have cancer. Which chemotherapeutic agents are the worst, and are there any that are safe that don't cause damage to your semen analysis?
Yeah, I can answer you. I don't know which ones, but I don't consider any chemotherapy as safe. But I have men that's been through chemotherapy and later on have had semen quality enough to give a baby. I'm thinking about one case, but he had testis carcinoma and recovered and fathered the child, and then 2 years later came back, no sperm. We could never get it back. So that long-term effect, he was lucky, but we did got sperm in the testis. So there was no, in the ejaculate, nothing, and we tried to treat him, and we got to the testis and then had success with ICSI. So they can father children, but some of them the chemo is so severe that we also find no sperm later on when we do testis biopsy.
Okay, unfortunately, we're just about out of time, but I'd like to finish the last two questions. Johan Kutsia says, in a case of poor morphology, no clinical issues, nothing to change in lifestyle, is it possible to improve morphology, or is assisted reproduction the way to go? A very quick answer.
Very, very good question. Short summary, men with low morphology, you must remember that all people do not identify the true P pattern correctly. That is very important. But let's say it is a true P pattern, they can still successfully fertilize, because we've showed it with the IVF model in that example that I've showed you. It was not ICSI, it was IVF, but lower chance. One must be careful not to tag the patient. If they are young, make sure about the broad history, lifestyle stories, make sure that the fertility of the female is good, give them a reasonable chance, because they have a chance to fall pregnant. But if they are above 35, refer them immediately for assistance. But when I see someone with teratozoospermia, P pattern, I do not immediately think ICSI. I always think, how can I help them? I take age into consideration. They can fall pregnant naturally.
The last question is Jean Marais. You identified abnormal sperm as having aneuploidy risk. Is there evidence about abnormal sperm impacting on maternal risk for preeclampsia? That's interesting. That's the last question, I'm afraid.
I couldn't hear
Normal
that
sperm
one.
causes preeclampsia.
Let's try again.
The question is, does abnormal sperm morphology cause maternal preeclampsia?
Oh, don't know.
Okay, thanks very much. Short and to the point as always. And I'm going to ask Professor Steve Jeffrey to thank you very much, Tinus.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Yeah, thanks so much. We really enjoyed the session. You've opened up this issue, this difficult area of fertility that we all struggle with. You've opened it up, and we'll definitely have you back. I think you've just made us realize that there's a lot more to discuss. So Chris will be getting back to you quite soon, and hopefully in the next, maybe certainly in the next few weeks even, we can in the news section, we can have another talk, on some of the more abnormal patterns maybe.
And how to treat them, because there's another question here. What treatment options are available? Well, we don't do that now, but we will do that next time we speak to you. Yeah. Professor Kruger, it's been wonderful having you. It's great having you. A lot of your students were on the line. I mean, that other guy was there. My wife always talks about you. She was a registrar under you many years ago. And it's been great having you. Don't know if you remember her, but she was there with you. And it's been great having you. And we look forward to greatly having you back in the near future. Thank you very much to Chris as well, the cage fighter. Please be careful. Remember what Professor Kruger said about cage fighting. It's very dangerous. And we look forward to Steve having us again on the line in the next few months. Good night and enjoy your break.
Good night. Thank you for the invitation, Peter. And I really enjoyed talking to you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Stephen. Bye.